Hello and welcome to the Success with Savita podcast, where we share hot tips on how to do life and business without losing your mind. I'm your host, Savita Nanjappa, entrepreneur, high-achieving 9-to-5er turned transformational success coach, helping you create a wildly successful business. Come hang out with me and other fabulous humans like you every week for stories and chats packed with a healthy dose of tips, resources, how-tos, and real talk. Side effects may include a happier and more confident you with each passing day. Hi, and welcome to the Success with Savita podcast. And today, while it's a Monday, we don't have an interview for you because I wanted to do this bonus episode about running a business and behind the scenes of my own business. I hope you like what I have to share, and I was thinking that going forward, I'm going to do a few episodes throughout the year where I will be sharing a peek into what it takes to run my business, the different pillars, maybe even do an income report, look at how we bring on clients, what are some things that we do to continue the growth of the business, and how we want to scale year on year. With that, I want to start today by talking about one pillar of my business, the content pillar of my business, among the others, which is podcasting. Since this is the podcast, I thought starting with podcasting would be a great idea, and I hope you like what we have to share. With that, let's get started. So a little background into how we got started with the podcast. We launched this podcast in 2021 March. However, it had been on my wish list, on my vision board, from, let's say, 2018. I have been an avid podcast listener, right? You start something when you like a certain medium yourself a lot and you know that there is a space for it. And 2021, there were a lot of podcasts already in India, so it's just one of them joining the gang. However, I had planned to do podcasting for a while. In 2018, when I was part of a coaching program, I also realized that a lot of fellow coaches had started their own podcasts, and I realized, okay, this is something I can do. This is something that I can pull off, and maybe it won't be so hard because there are a lot of resources, there are a lot of tools where you don't need a studio. You could now record via Zoom. So I knew that this was possible. However, there's a lesson, right? In putting things on your vision board, hoping for it to happen, but actually making it happen means that you need to build an action plan and go ahead and execute it, which I hadn't done. So it was this, it's like currently I would say, I want to write a book someday, but it's not going to happen till I sit down, write my book, outline, all of that. So cut to 2021. I recall that year, again in January, when I made my New Year goals, I had already put down starting a podcast on the list, okay? And what I did was, come end of Jan, Feb, I still hadn't started it. And I remember meeting this friend of mine, and she said, and I told her that this is something that's really on my must do. I want to do this definitely this year. And she said, hey, I have a friend who helps people start their podcasts. So can I put you in touch? I said, please, yes, because I do need help in, the structure, recording the intro jingles, the music, the theme music, all of that. And I have no clue how to do that. I mean, I could, because everything for me is about, you have to Google or watch the right videos and you would learn. But please help me. So she put me in touch with this friend of hers who had his own very successful podcast. And then he was also helping new podcasters get launched. And one of the things he did was put me in touch with Hubhopper, and I got this deal to do a Hubhopper original, which means that for the first 6 months I would be creating for Hubhopper and they would distribute it to other platforms, which was great for me, right? And so I went ahead, got started. He helped me put together the structure, the jingle, the music, all of that. And I went ahead and created the introduction, recorded it. And at this point, remember, I've had no clue. I've never conducted an interview in my life, but I knew that I wanted to do interview-style podcasts because that's something that everyone was doing. I had no idea that there were so many different genres like thriller and crime fiction and all of this. I don't know, even if I'd known if I would have started something in those areas, but conversation was good. I could do this. This was in my skill set. I knew I as a coach, you learn to ask the right questions. I'm thinking right. I could have been wrong. But I started first by reaching out to my own network, people I knew, people I'd worked with, people from my industry, people I was connected to, and started reaching out to them and said, hey, I'm going to start a podcast and I'd like for you to be on it. Of course, I recorded my first interview, and this friend helped put it together for me, edited it for me. And for the first month, I had hired them to do this for me for the first month, to edit all my episodes for me. Now, at this point, remember that I didn't have a strategy. It was just interviews, and I was going to record one and release an episode every Monday. I knew it was going to be focused on business because that's my area of work. I was not going to be talking about fashion or beauty, all of that. And I knew it would have to be, I would be speaking to guests who had something to share with the audience. At this time, what also happened is once the episodes came out, because of the profile of the guests, I also started to get uptick in listenership. And of course, when you are with a platform like Hubhopper, where you're an original, they try to kind of promote your podcast. So it really helped with building that early listenership, early audiences. Once that happened, I realized two things. Okay, one was podcasting wasn't as easy as I thought it would be, because if you're going to do solos like the one today, I'm purely responsible, right? I can sit down and I can record and I can have the episodes out in time. But if you were to not do the solos or bite-sized episodes, but instead you were dependent and reliant on bringing on guests, what I didn't realize was the work that it takes to bring on a guest is quite a challenge, because not every guest will agree, not everyone's going to come on board, not everyone's wanting to give their time to you, they're busy, they don't respond. So there is a runway required where you need to spend at least 1 to 2 months getting those guests confirmations, then blocking time, then recording those interviews, then having the edits ready, and then releasing the episode. Now, if I was smart, instead of releasing on March 21st, 2021, I would have probably planned it out, recorded a batch of interviews, and probably released mid-year, okay? Now, I hadn't done that, and here I was under pressure to kind of constantly go through, finding guests, recording, editing, putting the episodes out there. But we managed it, we pulled it off. I also did some solos. Originally, my plan was after to do interviews, and then I'm going to also do a solo. So I would have 2 episodes per week, but I wasn't able to pull that off. It was quite a task. And it takes a certain amount of energy to do this. Anyway, cut to 2022. By now, I had done X amount of episodes. I had managed to reach out to quite a few guests, amazing guests who had said yes, who had come so generously, shared their time on the podcast. And one of the things that I observed middle of 2022 was sometimes, because I hadn't left enough runway to get those guests, or because I wasn't putting together that focus of saying this month I'm going to record, let's say, 12 episodes. I used to record in the week off and then release the following week. And I was missing out on releasing an episode on our scheduled release date, which is a Monday. And this happened quite often. Guests can have cancellation at the last minute. Somebody says yes and they, are unwell, or the edit doesn't happen. Something goes wrong, right? So this happened to me, and I found that I was not being very consistent. That was my understanding. The second was I realized, look, I really like podcasting as a medium. Okay, I love it. Now, this is something I want to do. And I knew for podcasting, like any other platform, but for podcasting especially, consistency was key. You had to spend the time, energy, effort in making sure that you're consistent, because that's the only way to grow and retain your audiences, retain your listenership on the podcast. That I knew and I understood very well. But because, here I was coaching and running my business, and then podcasting just came in, I hadn't cleared out or planned for it to be a really big pillar in my business and the time that would take. I hadn't planned for that, right? So that was an understanding that I had over a period of time. Now, during this time, of course, there were some other things that happened. I improved my own interviewing skills, my own ability to ask better questions. I also improved my confidence. It's not like, you can do a podcast interview, but sometimes it's still new to you. I had never done interviews. I had never interviewed anybody in my life. And now suddenly to be interviewing some of these really big rock stars in their own field, I was intimidated sometimes. Now, I had improved on all of these areas. And I realized that at some point that, look, because I really like doing this and I want to continue doing this needs my attention. This needs a little bit of an extra focus. And I sat down and I said, what are my big 3 to 4 parts of my business that are important to me, other than the core offering, other than the core service that I offer? The core service is, of course, coaching and consultation to business owners. And now we had also started to get, corporate clients, which means I was moving into executive coaching. And the kind of clients that I was attracting also was changing. The profile was also growing. And alongside that, I found when my core business took over my time, I ended up dropping the ball on many other areas. And one of them was the podcast. So I knew that, okay, this is something I like. So I sat down and I identified 3-4 pillars that were really important for me in my business. And one of them is the podcast. So at this time, I said, okay, there comes a time when you need to be able to identify how much you can do yourself, what your level of expertise is in that area, where you have the time. It's not like you can't learn and do it, but do you have the time and the bandwidth and the energy? And could that focus be used elsewhere where you're learning instead of learning? Could you also use it in some other part of your business? So those are the questions you've got to ask yourself. And I asked myself these questions and I realized that there is a certain level of expertise I have. I could now edit episodes myself. I could identify and find guests and pitch to them fairly decently, but it needed time. Now, alongside all of this, did I also have the first question, of course, the expertise to be able to grow it further from where we had come? And the answer was actually no. I needed to grow in terms of listenership. I wanted to monetize the podcast. I wanted to get and attract brand partnerships. These were desires that I had for the platform. Monetize also because it helps me maintain and sustain this pillar in my business, because at this point, we are not making any money off the podcast, right? That's when I decided to get outside help. Go hire experts in your area, even if it's for a short time, who can come with a fresh pair of eyes, look at what you're doing, advise you, consult with you, improve your strategy or create a new strategy for you, and take you to the next level. And this is when I hired outside help. I hired some of the best in the business in the country today, Audstory. So Neeti and Sahil came in, and this is, I think, October, November, they came in, and they really started to go through the podcast with a fine-tooth comb. At this point, I knew that my challenge was consistency, and I knew I had to fix that before I fixed anything else, right? So I really put down a plan, okay? And of course, with their help, we have weekly calls, and they tell me of each part. So they looked at the structuring, they looked at my interview quality, they looked at the questions that I was asking, they looked at the type of guests that I was attracting, they looked at the music, the theme music, the introductions. And I will tell you this, one of the things that I was doing was really long guest introductions. So to shorten it, lots of resources and tips, right, to help me improve my quality on the podcast, my skill set on the podcast, and to help package it better, to help edit it better. So really, they are the producers. They kind of bring in that production eyes and look at the business that way. Next is, of course, they also help you in terms of building your audience. How can you grow? How can you attract brand partnerships? How do we pitch to them? So those are all the conversations that we're having. So behind the scenes, what I want to share with you is we need to look at our own different pillars within our own business and see what are those that are really important and relevant. Now, last week I sat down and listened to a lot of competition podcasts, and I felt a little good because until now I always felt like we're one of the podcasts that's out there. Maybe I'm not so great. Maybe I'm, below average. But I started to feel like, oh, you know what? Actually, we've done a fair amount of work. We're not so bad. Can we be better? Always. Can we grow bigger? Always. And I now fix my problem of consistency, right? which is I'm going to have those episodes, and I'm not just going to do those episodes on Monday. I'm also going to put in those bite-sized episodes on Thursday. So you see me putting out those episodes on Thursday. So as much as possible, if we can be fairly consistent, now we are talking. Now we can look at, hey, how can we improve the listenership? Hey, how can we bring in the brand partnerships? And everything. My point of giving you a peek into what goes on behind the making of this podcast is to really, whether it's a podcast, whether it's videos, whether it's something else that you're doing in your business, no, my takeaways have been, it shouldn't be on the wish list. Create an action plan and action it. If you can't do it yourself, get outside help. That's where you put in the money. You invest in that growth because it's important to you. Now, when I listened to competition podcasts, one of the things I realized was the people who had started before me or around the same time as me, in fact, there are quite a few female-only podcasts that are out there. While we started also with female guests, it wasn't intended to be like that. The strategy has come much later for me because initially it was like, I want to start a podcast, I'm going to do interviews, right? And yes, I knew kind of that it would be female-focused. We have a very large female audience and we bring on a lot of female guests, but we also bring on male guests because now the point of the podcast is about helping businesses, right? And it doesn't matter who can contribute value. We have 2 segments that we do, which is from the ground up, which is where we break down how a business or a brand was built from scratch. What were the breakthroughs that they had? What were the strategies that helped them? The how to segment caters to how to do something, right? How to grow on Instagram, how to start your YouTube channel, we really have a lot of how to build a habit, right? So we have those 2 segments, which I didn't have, I have an understanding of when I launched the podcast. That came much later. So I built that plan. Okay, these are the segments. And I also share now when I pitch to guests saying, hey, this is the segment that we would like to have you on. So there's a point of view when I'm pitching. They know I am asking them. They know what I'm asking them. And I know what's the takeaway that I want from each of the guests that I'm interviewing. And what I realized with the competition, coming back to that story, is a lot of people had stopped. A lot of my competition had stopped, given up, nothing done on the podcast for the last 10 months. Now, there could be 2 reasons for it, right? One is to, maybe they looked at it and they said, this is not adding value to my business and I don't want to do this any longer, which is fair. You should evaluate your business and see what's adding value to you and what's not. Or it could just be that it's not easy to stay consistent on podcasting. So it could be that. But I felt really good that I'm able to stay consistent with a medium that I really love. And that's also one of the things that has given me a bigger push to say, okay, what I know is working for me is the consistency. What I know isn't working for me is not enough people. It's not reaching to a lot of people. Not enough people know about the podcast. And to those people who listen to podcasts, every one of them should know about this podcast as well. Even if they don't have a business, there's something that they can take away from the guests, who are some fantastic guests, phenomenal guests that we can bring. What is the future of the podcast for me? For me, it is about bringing in more value to our audience, growing that audience, number 1. 2, bringing in more value because as we grow, we are able to go and reach out to more and more larger guests, bigger guests, and that's what I would like to do, to create partnerships, brand partnerships, okay, to monetize, of course, so the podcast can pay for itself. There is an investment that goes into editing the podcast, getting, expertise from outside to come here and build your strategy with you. So I would love to monetize the podcast, of course. And then finally, at the end of the day, it is to add value to all of this doesn't matter if I'm not adding value to you, the audience, okay? If we can create some kind of impact on the world, then, starting the podcast and running the podcast is meaningful to me because it means by showing up here and sharing all of this information with you, it is adding some value to you and your life and your business. So I hope you enjoyed this inside view, this behind the scenes into what goes into making of this podcast. And my biggest takeaways, like I've said, is have a plan, build a strategy, okay? And know when you can't do it yourself and you need to bring in expertise from outside. Invest in it, plan for that investment, budget it and invest in it, especially if it's a really important, meaningful pillar in your business. It's meaningful to you, it's meaningful to the audiences who listen. Then go ahead and invest in it. Thank you for listening in, and I hope you enjoyed this. Of course, like I said, if you like, follow, share with people who would like to listen to, then that goes a long way in helping us take this podcast to more people, bringing in bigger guests, and overall being able to add value to people's lives. So thank you for listening in. Leave a rating, leave a review, and I hope you keep coming back to the podcast and listening to everything that I'm going to be sharing in here. If you like these kind of episodes where I'm sharing a behind the scenes, let me know so we can bring you more. There's so many other parts of our business that I would love to share with you. So happy to bring that to you as well. And I will now see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like this episode and you want more, you can go to the show notes on my website, which is successwithsavita.com/podcast. If you like what you've heard so far, I would be grateful to you if you could leave me a 5-star review, subscribe to this podcast, and share with a friend who may find this useful. You can also follow me on my Instagram @successwithsavita and DM me any questions you may have, and I will be happy to answer them for you. Until the next episode, believe in yourself and all the best to your success.